Joining us now, though, live from Big Ten Media Day in Indianapolis is Yogi Roth, our good friend at Yogi Roth on Twitter. Yogi, first off, good morning to you. It is a little weird for me to say Yogi Roth Big Ten Network. Is it weird for Yogi Roth to be Yogi Roth Big Ten Network?
Well, when I saw my credential this morning, it was interesting, But what do you got to do? Right? Adapt to the times, right? Nick Saban said it, adjust or die. So it's all good, man. I think I've got such great gratitude for the time that I spent within the Pac-12 network. Over 200 employees, myself included, were all looking for work. So my biggest thing all offseason was trying to throw down for all of them. So anybody listening, if you're looking to hire a good producer, camera operator, there's so many that have competed at such a high level, and the demise of the league was no fault of theirs.
Yeah.
So that I think was hard and always probably will be hard. Just being a human and having so many connections. I mean, I came in there single, with no kids. I left married with 2 and friends forever. But that's why I even started, my new podcast, Why Options, so I can make sure I stay connected to all those schools on the West Coast as I'll be calling games and doing studio stuff for the Big Ten. And then being here, man, I'm just going to be real. You got to be part of one of these 2 leagues, in my opinion, right now, where the state of the game is in terms of the Big Ten and the SEC. And I like what this brand stands for. Grew up in Big Ten country in Pennsylvania. My first game was Arizona Penn State in 99.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, I have a great story about that game, if you don't mind, but it was LeVar Arrington's game.
Ooh.
And I'll never forget the roar of the crowd. He gets injured in the second quarter, goes into the locker room. And when he comes out, if you've ever been to State College in that stadium, Beaver Stadium, the tunnel's really deep, but really high, kind of like the Coliseum in L.A. And he starts to work his way around, and part of the stadium could see his shadow, and he just had that number 11 on, no pads, and you heard this roar, and then it just went around the stadium, 100,000, and I'm 15, 16 years old, and I remember whispering to myself, you're going to play major college football.
That's awesome.
So, I mean, I've been around this league for my entire life.
Yeah.
It's sad, of course, but it's also exciting. And, man, honestly, it's equally exciting to see what the Pac-12 does with Oregon State and Washington State. I'll be really curious, and I'll be tracking it and supporting it the whole time.
I'm curious when you have to adjust from covering, the Pac-12 to diving into some of these Big Ten teams, and there's some Pac-12 teams that made that transition over. You are a father. Did you study the old school way? Did you sit down with a magazine and go online? Or did you sit down and play a video game to get to know some of these teams the way everybody else in America is?
Well, in our house, we don't have video games yet because I know that is going to be a slippery slope. I've wanted to because I remember playing that game when I was in college. Jason's laughing over here because we all did the same thing. And I remember being like, whoa, 82's in, that's me. So I want to find a friend who has one. But no, I went old school. And really what I try to do is, and I hope people would say that about me, is I love to be a relational person. I really feel an element of my life is really to have thoughtful dialogue. So I've talked to every SID for the most part within this league. I've tried to connect with as many coaches and players in advance of these next 3 days. And then I'm going to be on a training camp tour. The Big Ten's been great about it. I'm going to hit, I think, 12 or 13 schools in the next 3 weeks. So it is from Oregon, UW, Oregon, to Penn State, Rutgers, Maryland, Ohio State, Indiana, Purdue. I mean, it's coast to coast. But I love it, man. If you love football, you love the stories, you love the game, you're going to fall in love with this. And I'm not trying to expect myself to know the ins and outs of this league top to bottom, 1 through 18, like I knew the Pac-12. But I'll get there, Give me a couple weeks. We're working on it.
It takes time. Visiting the camps, I think, will be a great help as well, and I look forward to all that content on the Big Ten Network. I'm curious to ask you this, Yogi, because you're a unique person where you've seen the rise of Oregon and where Oregon has come from, and now obviously going to follow them in a new conference and getting to know more about the Big Ten. There seems to be this notion from people in Big Ten territory of Oregon's going to have to adjust, and there's just bigger football, and it's colder weather, and how is Oregon going to handle all of that? I'm curious what your sense is, knowing where Oregon is at and how they've gotten to this point, how you think they're poised to handle this transition.
Oh, tremendously well. I mean, there is no media poll that I'm aware of. I don't think they do it here in the Big Ten. I know there are polls in terms of preseason picks, but if I had to choose a team, I would pick today the Ducks to win the league because I know that they have a quarterback. I really don't know what Ohio State's going to do. They're going to go with Julian Sand, the true freshman. They're going to go with the transfer from Kansas State. Just not sure there. But I think that matchup that everybody has circled, I think it's October 12th, is just going to be an epic one in Eugene. But they have all the firepower necessary to take a run. Will they go undefeated? It's hard. I don't know. I mean, their schedule's brutal. Very few teams have ever gone undefeated. One team in the history of the Pac-12 went undefeated. It was UW last year. You got to catch a bunch of breaks, and we know how the season is now in terms of its length with the CFP. But I think teams are going to – I don't want to say they're going to have to adjust to Oregon, but they're just a different beast in terms of the offensive tempo, the athleticism, I think the physicality. I mean, they're not coming in there just trying to fit in. I think they'll come in and they'll force teams to have to adjust a little bit to them, especially with what they're going to be doing on offense. I'm most intrigued to watch this second-year class of edge rushers that they have, led by Mateo Uyunglele and company. I think they have 9 guys their second year as edge rushers on the defensive front. It's going to be a huge part of what this team can do, and the physicality later on in the season when they go to Wisconsin, even when they have UW late in the season in their final game at home. That's just going to be unique to watch that instead of their rival Oregon State. So it won't be an easy run for them by any stretch, but I think they're prepared for it. Big fan of Dan Lanning. I think with Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh departing college football, there's a lot of space in terms of who's the face of it. Kirby Smart, of course, you can't argue what they've done, but I think Dan Lanning's about to be one of the bigger, if not biggest, figures in all of college football.
Yogi, you had a sit-down. You mentioned Oregon having a quarterback. You did a sit-down with Dylan Gabriel, and there's some really good stuff in there. I'm curious, what was your takeaway from talking and meeting Dylan Gabriel and where he's at just in his life, the experience he's bringing to Eugene? They just had an experienced quarterback turn his career around. Dylan's coming in, I think, with a little more cachet given what he did at Oklahoma versus what Bo had done at Auburn. What was your takeaway of Dylan Gabriel, now the Heisman favorite and the offensive player of the year preseason in the Big Ten? What would you take away as sitting down and talking and meeting Dylan Gabriel?
It was phenomenal. He's got unique traits to him. Okay, as a passer, obviously. As a competitor, obviously. Just go to the OU Texas game and just watch the final drive of that ball game. He's got a lot of those things. Of course, he could play at this level. The thing that stood out to me the most were the intangibles. I call it the it factor. So how do you define the it factor? Because it's overused and often undefined. It factor to me is when you walk into a room, people feel your presence, and you make them better. I saw him do that with 20 high school quarterbacks and 4 other college counselors in a span of about 15 minutes. He rolled in there, didn't have a massive ego, didn't try to take up a ton of space, just naturally did. Dramatically welcoming, thoughtful. At the Elite 11, we didn't film this, but I moderated a conversation between the 4 college guys and Pete Carroll. Coach Carroll, who was kind of a guest coach for us there because obviously he's out, came down. He's always supported Elite 11. And to sit at that round table in this little room adjacent to this high school field in Southern California was fascinating to watch him ask questions of Pete Carroll. Coach give him his questions back. And then you start learning more and watching Dylan operate and just say to myself, God, his teammates are going to fall in love with him. And knowing his only goal when he arrived was to really compete, to build relationships and connections within the roster that Dan Lanning has created. So I'm a huge fan. I think he's an absolute stud. He's a warrior. He's going to be perfect for this system. I think his edge is probably mirrors a little bit of what Dan Lanning's edge is, too. I think it's going to be an awesome fit for this team. They're loaded in a bunch of areas. I think he will be dealing all year long. I'm going to call his first game of the season against Idaho on Big Ten Network, so can't wait to get out there to Eugene for camp, and then, of course, call the first game.
Man, story time with Yogi is just off the charts today. This is awesome.
Let's go.
We need to do this more often. The only other one I got for Yogi, because I know you probably got a million of these lined up today. I'm just, we're talking about Oregon and their ability to maybe step in year one and be a player in the Big Ten. 2 other teams on the West Coast that are making that move. I know there's 3 others, but UCLA may be in a bit of a rebuild. I'm curious where you think USC is at through an offseason of change again with a defensive coordinator, a commitment to defense, and then Washington, who lost so much but hired a coach who did a great job building Arizona. I'm curious where you're at on both of them and how they transition into the Big Ten in year one.
Yeah, how interesting is it that both teams that played in the title game last year returned 4 and 3 starters respectively, I believe, in Michigan and UW. It's just nuts. I think there's an underlying sentiment that I'll talk about today on the Big Ten Network, which is the veteran teams are going to be the ones that I think find themselves surviving in December into the championship game in January. You look at all the 5th and 6th year seniors that both Michigan and UW had, there's something to that. You look at Ohio State, all the returning players, there's something to that of being in these competitive moments. So for UW, it's going to be a rebuild, obviously, when you look at all the departures that they've had on that roster. But Jed Fish, if there's one thing that no one can argue, is his ability to build. He took one of the worst programs I've ever seen in Arizona, and year one, they're 1-11. but they had 8 games where they went into the fourth quarter within a score, one of them including in Eugene when they played their 4th quarterback of the season as a starter. So he'll have them ready to go. It'll be a tough out for everybody. I think if teams are going to get UW, this is the year. So I can't wait to watch the Apple Cup because it'll be so much fun with Washington State and all that's transpired. It's going to be an awesome opportunity for Jake Dickert and his team. I think they can go in and get that one and be America's team. I really think Wazoo has an opportunity to do that, as well as Oregon State. So that's UW for me. Love the staff. I think the rebuild will get them there. They've got all the tools, NIL, recruiting, facility, support, alumni, fan base. So they'll be fine. It just won't happen as fast as I'm sure people would have hoped coming off a national championship appearance. I think for USC, man, I'll get on a limb here maybe because it feels like the world's just coming down on them, especially from other parts of the country. And I'm just sitting there watching adults scream on television, and I'm saying to myself, bad TV, bad example for anybody in college right now trying to do this profession, but also inaccurate. And so I say that of a guy who's probably as tight to that program as anybody, and I would say this. To me, it's a foundational year. Why do I say that? Year one, a ton of transfers, try to rebuild it, flip it as quickly as possible. Caught lightning in a bottle. Best player in America, didn't have to play Oregon, didn't have to play UW, kind of just got, I don't want to say got lucky, but found their way on the doorstep of the playoff in a circumstance where they probably necessarily weren't one of the top 4 teams in America if they were able to make it. Year two was kind of reality to me when you looked at them. Again, so many transfers. The offensive line was a majority of transfers after year one with Lincoln Riley, guys that all came up through high school. And now we're going to year 3, and I see them recruiting high school a lot more. I see them supplementing via the portal. They're going to score with Miller Moss. I love what he did in terms of waited his turn, got his shot, 6 touchdowns in the Holiday Bowl, and now he's the guy for them. The receiving core is going to me, catch this league by storm. When I look at all the preseason polls, they don't have a lot of the receivers for USC outside of Zachariah Branch on any, first, second, honorable mention, what have you. This receiving core is loaded. I'm telling you, man. I mean, just with those guys, just with Deuce Robinson watching him work out, he's an absolute beast. So look out for them. They'll score in bunches. And then defensively, I get it. They struggled last year tremendously. They made changes. They brought in Denton Lynn, who oversaw one of the greatest jumps in recent history in major college football at UCLA. They completely transformed that staff. They bring in a former head coach. They bring in a former defensive coordinator from the National Football League. I mean, they did everything you could ask for if you're an SC fan. You're saying we struggled on defense. So for people not to give them a shot this year blows my mind. And if you're going to go to recruiting and say, well, a bunch of guys from Georgia decommitted, I'd say, well, welcome to the new world of recruiting where you get leveraged all of the time in the era that we're in. And for me, SC, their national brand, when we did it at SC, man, it was recruit LA and leave the state for a first-round pick. I'd imagine they get back to a version of that as this new world comes into effect here in the Big Ten.
Yeah, great stuff. Yogi Roth, now of the Big Ten Network, of course, many years of the Pac-12 Network, and we're so pumped to have you still be a part of our West Coast football lives. Yogi, have a great time at Big Ten Media Day. Can't wait to watch you later on today when we're off the air, and hopefully we can do story time with Yogi throughout the year, man. Thanks. We always appreciate it.
Story time, baby. Hey, I'll be there August 3rd, so
August
whatever
3rd.
you need.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, lock it in, baby.
I love it. There you go. Yogi Roth. Great stuff from him live from Big Ten Media Day. Really, really fun stuff, man. On the Gabriel sit-down, his thoughts on Lanning, and I love the thought on Paul Feinbaum, the subliminal shot on Paul Feinbaum.